In this country, the crisis is always war. The revolution, 80 years later, the Civil War, 80 years later, World War II. And that's coming up on 80 years now, so. Something's about to happen.
On a bright summer day, the Brannock family, consisting of parents Dean and Nora and their adolescent children, Carter and Ellie, attend a house showing in the luxurious suburb of Westfield, New Jersey. After just a few minutes of exploring, the family is instantly smitten by the expensive home and revels in its various amenities, ranging from a historic dumbwaiter to an in-ground pool. Easily persuaded by Karen Calhoun, the real estate agent and Nora's old friend from college, Dean decides to make an offer. Despite his rocky financial history, Dean dumps his family's life savings into the down payment, convinced that he will be earning more money in the near future. 6 weeks later, spirits are high as the family begins to settle into their new home. Nora, elated by her recent success as a ceramic artist, is especially rejuvenated by the change in scenery. However, their situation starts to grow sour. One morning while Dean is making coffee, he is startled to discover his mentally troubled neighbor, Jasper Winslow, standing in the kitchen. Although Jasper leaves without incident, Dean is further unsettled when Ellie discovers a mysterious letter in the mail. The ominous letter, written by someone who calls themselves the Watcher, scolds the Brannocks for buying the house and their plans to renovate the basement. The Watcher states that their family has watched over the house for several generations, and they will continue to watch the Brannocks from afar. Angered by the thinly veiled threat, Dean and Nora take the letter to Detective Rourke Chamberlain at the Westfield Police Department. While Detective Chamberlain promises to run a DNA test on the letter, he claims that the Brannocks are in no immediate danger. Back at home, Dean meets two of his nosy neighbors, Mitch and Maureen, who complain about loud piano music coming from the Brannock home before rudely excusing themselves. Meanwhile, Nora meets with Karen at the nearby country club and asks for a list of other people who bid on the house, convinced that the Watcher could be among them. Later that afternoon, while Carter plays with his pet ferret, Sprinkles, he discovers Jasper hiding in the dumbwaiter. Thoroughly frustrated, Dean throws him out of the house, drawing the ire of Jasper's sister, Pearl Winslow. Pearl, who is equally obsessed with the dumbwaiter and the other historic aspects of the Brannocks' house, also vows to keep an eye on the family. That night, things take a violent turn when someone breaks into the house and kills Sprinkles the ferret. To prevent further home intrusions, Dean and Nora hire a young security specialist named Dakota to equip the house with a new alarm system. However, the extra home protection doesn't provide much peace of mind when another disturbing letter from the Watcher arrives, implying that the nightmare is just beginning. Wasting no time, Dean and Nora bring the second letter from the Watcher to Detective Chamberlain, who refers them to the eccentric private detective, Theodora Birch. After briefly meeting in a local diner and learning of Theodora's interest to solve the case despite having cancer, Dean hires her to investigate the Watcher's identity. Later that evening, Nora decides to rent a motel room for a few weeks while the renovations begin, as she doesn't feel safe sleeping at home. However, Dean chooses to sleep at the house in order to watch out for anything suspicious. That night, Dean is awoken by someone ringing the doorbell, and while looking for the culprit, he discovers eerie music emanating from an intercom upstairs. At the motel, Nora receives an ominous phone call of someone breathing heavily, but is unable to track the caller. The next morning, Karen and Nora meet for breakfast, and while Karen comes up short with information on the other bidders, she suggests that the Brannocks finish renovations and simply sell the house. For further peace of mind, Dean and Nora also hired Dakota for overnight security at the motel. Thanks to a tip from Theodora, Dean arranges a meeting with one of the home's previous owners, Andrew. At the diner, Andrew tells Dean about his disturbing experiences at the house and that he feverishly believes that Mitch and Maureen are blood-drinking cultists. Although Dean is appropriately dismissive of the outrageous theory, some of Andrew's story remains believable, as he possesses dozens of letters from the Watcher. That night at the motel, all is quiet, but Dakota and Ellie get steamy during a moonlit visit to the pool. As renovations officially start at the house, the neighbors begin to complain about the construction noise, especially Maureen. The bad mood snowballs further when Dean doesn't receive an expected promotion at work, spelling potential money troubles. To make matters even more grim, Mitch and Maureen mysteriously commit suicide one night, leaving their adult son Christopher in shambles. At the end of it all, Dean can't even get a solid night of sleep, as he is awoken by his security alarm and sees Jasper Winslow watching on from the street corner. Now completely enamored with solving the mystery, Dean sets up a clue board in a spare room upstairs and reviews evidence with Theodora. Dismissing Andrew's ridiculous story and removing Mitch and Maureen from suspicion, the focus falls on Jasper Winslow. Through some keen detective work, Theodora discovers that Jasper was once a functioning member of society. But after an unknown event in 1995, he became mentally sheltered and spent decades in behavioral therapy as a result. Meanwhile, after a game of tennis at the country club, Karen once again encourages Nora to sell her house as soon as possible. Back at home, as renovations on the kitchen finish up, Dean meets a religious man named John, who claims to be the building inspector. In an ominous conversation, John states that the world is overdue for a crisis, and before leaving, he tells Dean that Ellie and Dakota are having a romantic relationship. When Dean complains about John's strange behavior to one of the construction workers, they have no knowledge of the supposed building inspector, leaving John's true identity a mystery. Later, as Nora and the kids leave for the motel, Dean asks Ellie about her relationship with Dakota, but she denies everything. With his family life already strained, Dean's obsession with the Watcher begins to affect his career as well, as he ditches work when Theodora calls him with juicy information about the history of the house. Although there is no public record of it happening, Theodora tells Dean that interestingly, John Graff lived in the house until 1995. After John was fired from work and hid it from his family, he began to receive threatening letters from the Watcher. Driven insane by his crumbling life and the Watcher's letters, John shot and killed his entire family, drained the blood from their bodies, and then left them decaying in the house for 2 weeks. Eventually, Jasper Winslow stumbled upon the gruesome scene at the house, leaving him mentally scarred for life. Dumbstruck by the story, Dean instantly believes that John Graff is the same religious man that was posing as the building inspector. With the kitchen renovations complete and security cameras finally installed, Nora and the kids leave the motel behind and move back into the house. Although things seem to have settled down, Nora's paranoia is reaffirmed when yet another letter from the Watcher arrives in the mail. One day, as he returns home, Dean is confronted by Nora, who claims that he is having an affair. Jumping back 1 week earlier, Dean and Nora meet with Karen's real estate boss, Darren. Frustrated that Darren didn't disclose any of the disturbing information about the house before they bought it, they threaten to sue him, but ultimately realize their case is unwinnable, supplemented by a box of evidence from Detective Chamberlain. Dean continues to research details about John Graff, further impacting his performance at work. While Dean and Nora argue about whether or not they should sell the house, Theodora presents some new information about Dakota. Apparently, Dakota is a fan of online video games, and while playing, he uses the screen name The Watcher. Tensions rise between Nora, Dean, and Ellie after the parents search through her phone for information on Dakota and find lewd pictures. When Dakota arrives the next day to fix one of the security cameras, Dean confronts him about his screen name and his relationship with Ellie, but the police clear him of all wrongdoing. However, Detective Chamberlain obtains a DNA sample from Dakota to compare against the DNA from the Watcher letters. Angry with her father, Ellie posts a video online calling him a racist, tarnishing his public image. After Nora meets with Karen at the country club and they discuss selling the house, Nora returns home and finds a letter in the mail containing a flash drive. At work, Dean's boss also receives the flash drive, which contains an incriminating video of Dean sleeping at home while a young girl undresses at his bedside. Confused and with no recollection of the girl in the bedroom, Dean leaves work and runs into Dakota, who admits to placing the camera in the bedroom and sending the flash drives. When Dean comes back home from work, Nora confronts him with the video and throws him out of the house, threatening to file for divorce. Needing a place to stay, Dean shacks up at the motel. To make matters even stranger, while Dean secretly watches over the house that night for intruders, he sees Mitch and Maureen return home in a taxi, healthy and alive. A few days later, while looking over the phone records, Nora realizes that the ominous call she received at the motel was made using her home phone. Confiding in Theodora, Nora begins to believe that Dean is the Watcher, and that he wrote the letters to try and scare her into selling the house. After consulting a handwriting specialist, Theodora comes up with some circumstantial evidence supporting Nora's theory, but she also learns that the letters could have been written by multiple people. However, Nora is much more disturbed when she learns that Dean spent their savings on the initial home payment, and then took out another high-interest loan to pay for the renovations. But her day improves slightly when she visits the art gallery and finds out that most of her ceramics have successfully been sold. Meanwhile, Karen pays a visit to Mitch and Maureen and offers to buy their house, stating that she and Darren operate a private house flipping company. Back in Westfield neighborhood, Nora is invited to a luncheon at Pearl's house, where Maureen spills the truth about her and Mitch's faked deaths. In a surprising twist, it turns out her troubled son Christopher killed an elderly homeless couple and tried to pass their bodies off as Mitch and Maureen, all in an effort to collect life insurance money. While discussing the letters from the Watcher, Pearl mentions that she also received a similarly typewritten poem called An Ode to a House several years prior, but didn't think much of it. With this new information, Nora changes her mind about Dean, but is still left clueless about the Watcher's real identity. When Dean leaves work later that day, he is pulled aside by Dakota, who shares a startling revelation. After checking the security cameras, Dakota discovered that there is no footage of the girl from Dean's incriminating video arriving at the Brannocks' home, meaning that unless the girl is some sort of ghost, there must be a secret entrance to the house. Later, Dean presents this information to Nora, and also admits to sending the most recent Watcher letter apologizing for the deception. With part of the truth revealed, Nora and Dean make a renewed effort to uncover the identity of the Watcher and head to Detective Chamberlain's office for the DNA results. Although the results don't match any known criminals, the DNA from the Watcher's letter is conclusively female. This makes Nora suspect that Karen is the Watcher, as she constantly encourages Nora to sell her house. Together with Dean, Nora confronts Karen at the country club while she's having lunch with Detective Chamberlain, causing tension between the group. Back at home, Ellie researches the Ode to a House poem online and finds a social media group where alumni of Westfield High School share their old poems from writing class. When Nora sees a picture of the English teacher in charge of the group, Roger Kaplan, she immediately recognizes him from the initial home showing. Soon after, one of the contractors finds a secret tunnel in the basement. Bewildered but curious, Dean and Nora investigate the tunnel and encounter a mysterious figure in the shadows. Chasing the figure further into the tunnels, Dean and Nora discover an old bedroom, showing signs that someone has been secretly living under the house. Fleeing through another secret exit, we learn that the man is John Graff, who is being aided by Pearl Winslow. After boarding up the basement entrance, Dean and Nora inform Detective Chamberlain about the tunnels, but due to their outburst at the country club, he refuses to help. Left without many allies, the couple turns to Theodora, who has uncovered information about Roger Kaplan. According to Roger's ex-wife, Trish, Roger has been fascinated with historic houses since his childhood, and even started writing anonymous letters of adoration. After coming up with the idea for his Ode to a House writing lesson, Roger began writing a letter to one specific house every year, owned by Carol Flanagan. Eventually, his letters became dark and depressing, and soon after, Carol started receiving letters from the Watcher as well. Eager to confront another suspect, Dean and Nora rudely ambush Roger Kaplan and his wife Miko at the grocery store and accuse him of being the Watcher. Roger denies everything, but comes to the Brannock house the next day and hurls insults at them from the street curb. At the same time, Pearl Winslow is joined in her home by Jasper and John Graff, where the trio discusses various changes to the historic homes in the neighborhood. When Dean comes to visit and asks to inspect the house for an entrance to the tunnel, Pearl declines and slams the door in his face. Fed up with the entire situation, Dean and Nora decide to finally list the house for sale and quickly receive an offer. But the buyers change their minds when Karen has a scandalous article published online. Despite everything, the Brannocks leave Westfield and move back to New York City, unsure of the future. Several weeks later, while Nora celebrates continued success at the art gallery, Dean remains obsessed with the identity of the Watcher, driving another wedge between the couple. However, when they hear that Theodora's cancer is getting worse, they rush to the hospital to visit her. While Dean goes to the corner store to grab some things for Theodora, Nora expresses her concern for Dean and his refusal to let the mystery go unsolved. Things only get worse when Nora finds out that Dean may be sending threatening letters to his old Westfield neighbors. But when Dean goes to visit Theodora at the hospital, he learns the bitter truth. Sick and dying, Theodora confesses that she owned the house in Westfield before the Brannocks, but was forced to sell it to pay for her medical bills. However, after her money troubles subsided, she wanted the house back, but the Brannocks had already moved in. In a slapdash plan to convince Nora and Dean to sell the house, she started sending the Watcher letters, made up the story about John Graff, and committed other deceptions along the way. However, when Dean goes back to Westfield to apologize to Maureen, she claims that Theodora Birch never owned the house. At Theodora's funeral, her daughter Nina confirms this, and claims that Theodora falsely confessed to being the Watcher as a way to bring Dean and Nora some closure. Luckily, the Brannock family finally has some good luck when they receive an offer on the house from a private company and decide to sell it. Curious about who the new owners are, Nora visits the Westfield house and discovers that Karen has moved in. Still bitter over the argument at the country club, Nora threatens Karen to watch out, as she will always be watching. That night, Karen is tormented by the Watcher, who leaves a menacing letter in the dumbwaiter and kills her dog before appearing through a trap door on the stairs. As a result, Karen flees from the house and immediately sells it. Sometime later, Dean attends a therapy session, and while he feigns optimism, the unsolved Watcher case still haunts him endlessly. Back in Westfield, yet another new family moves into the Brannocks' old home, while Maureen, Pearl, and the rest of the neighbors watch on. This includes Dean, who even chats with the new owner, but lies and says his name is John. As Dean leaves, Nora watches him in secret, aware that the house has changed her family for good.
You